Hi, my name is Delvin Varghese, and today, on behalf of my co-authors listed on this page, I'll be presenting the paper Shadow Program Committee, Designing for Diversity and Equity Within Academic Communities. The context for this paper is that during ACM Campus 2021, the general chairs of that conference invited us, who are 4 different early career researchers, different stages of our academic journey, to come and help them run a shadow program committee. If you're not familiar with Shadow Program Committee, it's a sandbox that is used to help train reviewers and help give reviewers an opportunity to practice their reviewing skills that happens in parallel to the actual program committee. And that way, the people taking part in Shadow Program Committee can safely write reviews, learn how to write reviews without influencing the actual review process. So this is the prior model, and we were just trying a new approach. One of the reasons we're trying things like Shadow Program Committee is to give greater support in professional development for early career researchers. Although many of the basics required for successful academic careers can be given locally, for example, a mentorship and a grant writing support and being part of an active research group. However, for many ECRs who are in the global south or who are not in institutionally strong context, this additional support from things like Shadow PC can be very helpful. And particularly in this post-COVID landscape we find ourselves in, where access to conferences and other opportunities has been limited, opportunities like remote shadow program committees can fill a gap for professional development. So in our case, we sent out this call for participation. We had around 80 participants express interest and take part in this Shadow PC. 36 of them had never reviewed a paper before. So we thought that was really great, as we particularly wanted to target that cohort. In addition to doing this as a research enterprise through an action research model, we had 4 other principles we were keeping in mind. We wanted this to be accessible for people from around the world, especially the global south. So when we had the cohort of 80 join, we ran our everything we ran that was live using Zoom. It was run in 4 different sessions throughout the day so that people could attend at a time that was convenient for them. We used existing mediums where possible. So we used WhatsApp for group discussions, we used Zoom for live interactions, and we used email and other mediums like that for brainstorming. And this allowed us to allow participants, leverage participants' existing knowledge of platforms. And importantly, we wanted to be sensitive to the cultures of participants. Many participants were from global south settings where there's cultural and social expectations around hierarchical relationships. However, we found that our design of the workshop spaces where we encourage peer-to-peer support and mentoring really helped to bridge that gap. In terms of the actual Shadow PC experience itself, the pipeline consisted of starting with some orientation meetings where they were introduced to what a Shadow PC is, the cultures around reviewing within Campus and other conferencing spaces in computer science. So we had robust discussions around this. After that, we sent some resources around review writing and what to look out for, biases, how to overcome them, what a good review looks like, and the characteristics of a bad review. And once we were confident that the participants were knowledgeable about reviews, we then proceeded to the next stage, which was assigning them papers to review. We had already received consent from the authors of these papers, and these papers, the participants took turns playing different roles. So the role of a regular reviewer, a second associate chair, and a first associate chair. This allowed them to have experience across the different parts of a program committee roles. And then they had a program committee meeting where, just like typical computer science conferences, we allowed the first AC to give a brief presentation on the paper about their meta review, and the second AC could add anything that they wanted to add. And then there was a voting system. And then at the end of the meeting, all the papers had an accept or reject decision attached to them. And finally, we ended the Shadow PC experience, and this whole experience was spanning over a few months with a debrief meeting, which allowed us to actually get back to the authors with some of the reviews, collect their feedback, and bring it to the debrief meeting. For our data collection, we interviewed 11 of the authors who had consented to give their papers, and we had given them feedback. So we were able to ask them questions about the quality of the feedback, comparing them to the feedback, the reviews with the actual technical program committee as well. So that was an interesting point of comparison. We also took all the group conversations from WhatsApp, the recordings from the Zoom sessions, the workshop recordings, and 4 members of our research team used inductive thematic analysis as an approach to do this data analysis. Let's briefly look at the findings before we look at the insights that can be used. One of the first findings for us was around the importance of infrastructures for mentorship for peers and seniors. So bridging the gap between not just providing mentorship in a local context with the line manager, but actually mentorship that happens across spaces through curated spaces like a shadow program committee. And one of the opportunities that this brings is new insights in addition to the insights they're learning in their local context. And this also builds informal development approaches. So there might be formal opportunities for professional development in a local institutional setting, but the additional benefit of something like Shadow PC is the additional informal approaches that this gives. We also found that many of the participants who had never reviewed a paper before, because 36 of them had never reviewed a paper before, this was one of their first opportunities to gain a first-hand experience of reviewing a full paper and learning about the process end to end. So they learned about the etiquettes and learned about many of the assumptions that go into conferencing communities like Compass and others, which are unspoken but are learned over time. So this was a fast-track approach to learn many of those things. We also saw our participants grow in their own understanding of who they are as academics and how they deal with their own internal biases, for example, or even wanting to be sure about the review before submitting or finalizing them, and having multiple back and forth with their fellow reviewers, gaining in confidence along the way about their position and their voice on that review. In the paper, we have quite a few different discussion points about what this means for developing spaces for professional development for early career researchers. But here, I just want to summarize a handful of them. So one of them we talked about is how we can proactively design for social capital. So there are many opportunities for networking in and around online conferencing events if we are very deliberative about it. So what are the design decisions we can make about not just mass networking opportunities in the Zoom room, but actually before the Zoom meetings begin, how can we have smaller groups coalesce, have conversations? How can we encourage diversity in conversations, particularly when we are scheduling around time zones? And this diversity can be around both country of origin, cultures, as well as career stages, so that mentoring is happening at a peer-to-peer level. And as we said in one of the findings, from a peer-to-peer to a seniority level as well. One of the ongoing challenges in conferencing spaces is the reliability of the reviewer model. Many of us have experience with the peer reviewing process, and we love it and we hate it. The current peer review model is very strained, and Shadow PCs can help by designing, additional processes for training more ECRs so that they're better equipped to be doing reviews, and helping ECRs to enter the stream much more quickly as well. The other point to think about here is that how can conferences become not just a point for dissemination, but also a point of teaching around what it means to be critical thinkers in terms of review writing, how we can train ECRs about the intricacies of the peer review process. Many of these things, as I said earlier, are learned over many years through mentoring in a local context, but through a process like Shadow PC, these can be accelerated by deliberately speaking into these points and teaching into them. And finally, there's an opportunity like in many other fields, like in healthcare or other settings, like for teachers, there is an expectation around continuous professional development. So there's an opportunity here. How do we think about ongoing continuous professional development for academics and junior academics in particular? So this is one of the limitations of something like Shadow PC, because it's a one-off approach, and something like this, where it's a coordinated effort that takes a few months of planning and delivery, it can become quite unsustainable due to the level of effort. In this particular instance, there were 4 of us running it, which made it a little bit manageable. But we need to think about future pathways that are perhaps spread over the course of a year, that are recognized by conferences as being valuable, and perhaps recognized in the form of admission into reviewer pools, into conferences within computing spaces. We talk a lot more about this in the paper. Thank you so much for joining me today in watching this video and thinking about program committees. I would love to hear from you if you have any thoughts, any questions about this, or just want to have a chat. My email address is given here. And I hope you enjoy the rest of this conference. Thank you.